Okay, my friends, welcome to News Trap. It is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. How is it going? How is your week? I hope it's good. I want to thank all the Nostalgia Trap Patreon subscribers who are commenting on our News Trap episodes. I really appreciate the grace being given, honestly, by everyone. Some of you who recognize that what I'm talking about, particularly when it comes to Hamas and campus protesters, it is kind of a right-wing talking point, and it's very easy to sort of see that as like, oh, that's just a cheap, disingenuous, Bill Maher asshole type point. But like I said, I appreciate the grace that everyone recognizes that that's not what I'm trying to do. Instead, I think it's an important conversation on the left, particularly in a media environment that sort of is ready to just exploit and be disingenuous and distort particularly the views of the left. There's been some great comments. I just want to highlight one from Alex this morning. Alex says, I think it's extremely important to push back against that narrative of campus protesters embracing terrorism, but how to effectively do that in such a reactionary media environment where vicious pro-Hamas sound bites tend to get amplified is surely an important consideration. And I think the left can only do so much in making their views palatable for a corporate media controlled by the dictates of finance, capital, and the Israel lobby. I agree, Alex, and I think that's a really important point, and it's one that if I haven't said explicitly, it's one that I hope is an assumption that, we're trying to figure out a way to make ideas palatable, but it's also, there's a limit to how much you can do that in a sort of media environment, but also it's just the American public, right? I don't think we're going to get the American public on the side of Hamas being the freedom fighters who are going to ultimately destroy Israel and bring peace to the Middle East. I don't know if we will. I don't know if we want to, but these are conversations worth having. And I just wanted to point out that I appreciate being able to have them without just falling into the social media trap of screaming at one another, because I do think ultimately my hope is that we all are on the side of humanity and peace, and how to achieve that is a very, very tricky thing and big question for the left. So thank you all the commenters. Let's keep talking about this stuff. I want to move on, though, and bring back a little of that labor stuff I was talking about yesterday. Justin sent some intense screenshots this morning that key into that quote-unquote labor crisis in the United States, and some tricky and honestly disturbing angles on it. One of them is a New York Times piece this morning about a class action lawsuit being brought by prisoners in Alabama about convict labor. Listen to this. Now, Walker, a 37-year-old recently paroled after 15 years in prison, has teamed up with 9 still incarcerated fellow plaintiffs, as well as some prominent labor lawyers and unions, to file a class action. They're suing Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, the state's attorney general, the prisons commissioner, parole board leaders, and a slew of cities, along with companies they claim rely on forced labor, including Hyundai supplier Ju Young, beer distributor Bama Budweiser of Montgomery, and franchises of KFC, McDonald's, and Wendy's. The workers suing are all black. Their class action accuses the defendants of human trafficking, racketeering, and violating the Ku Klux Klan Act, which targets conspiracies to deprive people of their constitutional rights. They argue that the government officials colluded to keep black people imprisoned and available as cheap labor, and that the companies conspired to profit from the coerced work. The suit, filed right before Christmas, says it seeks to abolish a modern-day form of slavery. So listen to the scale of this. This is unbelievable. There are 800,000 incarcerated workers in the United States, and they do roughly $10 billion worth of work a year. More than $2 billion of it for clients outside the prison system, according to a 2022 study by the ACLU and the University of Chicago. The lawsuit estimates that the state of Alabama makes over $450 million off of prisoners' labor. We wanted to bring an indictment against the entire system, says one of the plaintiffs, Robert Earl Counsel, who goes by the moniker Kinetic Justice. That includes the companies they say profit from making inmates build auto parts, haul beer, and ring up Big Macs, thanks to a system that ensures people deemed safe enough to work remain incarcerated and working on the cheap. So I just want to underline that before I move forward, because I have a few more screenshots to share about this. But the idea that there are prisoners that are being bussed in the middle of the night to go work at Wendy's or KFC or Budweiser, and then they're shipped back to the prison in the mornings, it means that there is a form of slavery happening within our society, not just in the prisons, but within our society. We have slaves working among us, and that's something worth recognizing and thinking about, particularly when small businesses are starting to complain that the cost of labor is too high. I have my eye on prison labor, because I think they're going to try to make prison labor much more of a thing in the American economy, and particularly they're going to have to erode laws around slavery in order to do that. Well, they've got the Trump Supreme Court lined up. Samuel Alito and John Roberts and the rest of those cocksuckers are very much ready to erode constitutional protections banning slavery. Let's look at the rest of this story. Most defendants in the Alabama case have filed motions to dismiss it, sometimes suggesting that the workers are treated generously already or that convicts deserve forced labor. Bama Budweiser of Montgomery Incorporated stresses in its motion that the case was brought by, quote, 2 murderers, an attempted murderer, multiple violent felons, robbers, burglars, and drug dealers, and they come into this court complaining about having to work for a beer distributor. What's actually unconstitutional, the company argues, is the federal law against human trafficking, because it usurps Alabama's authority to manage its own inmates, as well as the KKK Act, which it calls a freakish perversion of federalism that wrongly imposes a Good Samaritan duty on mere bystanders. Bama Budweiser declined to comment to Bloomberg Businessweek, but most of the other companies named in the story did the same or didn't respond to requests for comment. So most of them are not saying anything. But the lawyers for Budweiser are literally saying that, first of all, robbers and burglars and drug dealers should be slaves. They deserve slavery. They are literally making that argument. And they're saying that this is a states' rights issue, that these federal rules against slavery are stopping them from expressing their independence to run their own economic issues. We're at the Civil War, dude. We are back at the Civil War. This is a southern state, Alabama, that is enslaving black people in prison, and the corporations that are profiting off of it with the collusion of the state are making the argument that they fucking deserve it and that the federal government should stop trying to stop slavery. Unfucking believable. Let's continue. Tommy, who's been incarcerated for robbery and burglary since George W. Bush was president, did a stint a few years ago cooking chicken at a KFC, where fellow inmates worked the cash register. He says the job netted him a few dollars an hour after deductions for the state, and one of the franchise's owners insisted he also load vans for her family's catering company and make extra chicken strips for that side business for free. The day he told her that he wouldn't be doing the unpaid catering work anymore, he worked an otherwise normal shift before learning from a prison supervisor that he'd been fired. When Tommy's mother, Carolyn Cox, showed up to advocate for him at a parole hearing in 2022, the state's attorney cited this firing as evidence that her son, quote, wouldn't follow the rules. KFC didn't respond to requests for comments. So this is fucking slaves making fried chicken, and if they say anything about it, they're punished further. It's just fucking, it's unreal. This is the United States. The one thing that I want to say before we move on this issue is that, again, the writing is on the wall. The map of the future in the United States is legalized slavery. I'm just going to throw that out there. I wonder what you guys think about that. Okay, the other bit of this is the sort of migrant issue, right? There's kind of a migrant issue. There's a huge migrant crisis. And I mentioned it yesterday as a sort of like, well, part of it is because it's just pure capitalism, economic logic is saying the people that are coming across the border are not economically valuable, and therefore there's going to be a push from both parties to treat them like shit, keep them out, and they're going to exploit that. Nativism, you can expect all of that. But there's another angle on this, and this is the kind of like, I don't know, foreign policy, criminal angle. It also goes into some demonic, satanic shit. The cartels in Mexico have become much more entrenched in the lives of people there and in the structures of government and the way things run. Listen to this. Organized crime groups are turning Mexico's elections into a literal battleground, making the campaign this year one of the deadliest in the country's modern history. More than 24 candidates have been killed leading up to the June 2nd vote. Hundreds have dropped out of the race. More than 400 have asked the federal government for security details. The campaign of intimidation and assassination is putting democracy itself at risk. The armed group's goal is to install friendly leaders in local offices so they can better exploit Mexican communities. Once largely focused on shipping drugs to the United States, the cartels now also smuggle migrants, extort businesses, and win contracts for firms they control. They want to name towns' police chiefs and public works directors. So, to me, just reading this, I'm hearing just straight up fascism. This is actually the stuff that like American liberals fear MAGA wants to do. MAGA doesn't have the kind of power of the Mexican cartels to sort of take over elections in this violent way. But that's what they fear. But if you look at Mexico, it's actually happening. To continue. They don't like it when you talk about the organized crime violence, the extortion, the people forced out of their communities, said Ochoa, running as the PRI candidate to represent Chiapas State in the Senate. When his campaign announces visits to strife-torn areas, he said, "We received threats and warnings to not come." He'd had his own brush with danger in February when gunmen on motorcycles charged after him following a campaign stop in a tense town. He wasn't going to leave himself so vulnerable again. So there's this sort of notion that, running for office is a dangerous thing because the cartels, and they are at war with each other, they're not just one cartel, might fuck with you. Assassins have targeted candidates from all of Mexico's major parties. In Maravato, a municipality of 80,000 in the central state of Michoacan, got that wrong. 3 candidates for mayor have been killed. 2 from Morena, Lopez Obrador's party, and 1 from the opposition National Action Party, or PAN. Carlos Palamenque, head of the PAN in Chiapas, says nearly 24 mayoral candidates from the party have dropped out of their races. It used to be the cartels bought off voters, he says. Now they force candidates from the race. It's cheaper. Ochoa, whose party ran Mexico for 7 decades in the last century, blames today's violence on incompetent politicians. They let different cartels in, he said. They didn't draw the line. These days, around a dozen cartels operate in Chiapas. They include Mexico's 2 most powerful crime groups, the Sinaloa and the Jalisco New Generation cartels. Homicides and disappearances have soared. The casualties in recent months include 6 political candidates. Yet, many residents are too frightened to even talk about the rising criminality. A school teacher who organized a march condemning narco violence in the town of Chisamucelo was tortured and killed in front of his wife and children. So again, truly demonic shit happening in Mexico, right? Just a few miles south of me here in Southern California. You don't see a lot of it in American culture except sort of like Sicario type shit I'm thinking of, like a sort of like pop culture take on like how scary it all is in Mexico. But the larger point, I think, for American politics, and I know that's kind of a grim way of putting it, because the people down in Mexico are suffering tremendously. But how's that going to affect American politics? Well, it's the border. Listen to this. A Border Patrol agent has claimed that cartels are the ones in control of the U.S.-Mexico border. The anonymous agent told News Nation that the U.S. government does not have control of the border, which has fallen into the hands of cartels. The biggest thing is that we do not control the border. The cartels control the border, the agent said. Everything that we do is a reaction to things that they've planned. Usually we're chasing around pawns while the kings and queens are doing whatever they want. That's the story of the world, man. The agent asked to remain anonymous because he said he's terrified to talk to media and possibly losing his job over it. Sounds like you could lose more than your job, bro. Really freaky shit. But again, the point being that in the United States, there's a rising sort of, deep anti-immigrant politics happening on both sides. And I say rising, it's been there throughout the entirety of American history. But there have been, there's been a pendulum swing, definitely, at different moments around immigration. But I'm thinking specifically about capitalism, about the sort of economic element of this, the sort of idea that there are increasingly people that are sort of subjected to the whims of criminal groups and corrupt states, and that's sucking them deeper and deeper into like really shitty labor situations, right? Like the migrant crisis combined with the prison labor stuff is a map of the future that means that capitalism is seeking ways to make it legal to quote unquote employ people in labor without the sort of protections that we've come to know. And when you think, I mentioned the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. When you think about that war as sort of a recalibration of what capitalism is and what it could be, and I know that's just one way of looking at it. The free labor theory. I mean, this is like going back to like Eric Foner stuff. This is going back to the big historiography of what the Civil War actually means. But, one of those big points is that the Civil War represented a triumph of the free labor idea. The idea that a person could only contract with their labor and not have it stolen from them. Now, obviously, if you know your history and you know all that slavery by another name stuff and what happened in the South during Reconstruction, then you must know that Southern power structures succeeded in finding legal ways to maintain their power and maintain their ability to extract free labor, unpaid labor from black people through the convict leasing system, through prison, through incarceration and police. So, this all connects, honestly, to like George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, that stuff that's sort of, in many ways, fallen off. But, you think about like the continued story of abolition, prison abolition, the abolish movement, the defund movement. Here it is. It's happening with lawyers in Alabama who are putting together a class action lawsuit to challenge this stuff legally. The problem to me is knowing where the Supreme Court stands on this. And I'm talking about Alito and John Roberts and others that feel that they're ready to give the states the power to do what they want on this issue. And that part of it is honestly maybe predictable, but it is a map of the future that means that slavery will be an ingredient in our lives in a much more profound way than it already is. That's all I have for you today. I would love to hear your comments and ideas. I know I'm such a drag. Let me think of something positive to end on. Well, this isn't positive, but I don't know how positive this will be. It's foggy here in Ventura right now, Ventura, California. If you know the little California beach towns, during May and June, it's often just overcast, wet, about 58 degrees, and it's kind of a drag. It's kind of a bummer, and people get really depressed about it. There's something that happens there where you have to kind of like brace yourself against it. And in the years that I've been living here, I've been always trying to remember the like May gray and June gloom is coming and trying to like find ways to appreciate it. So that's my positive angle today, is that like I'm trying to love the fog. I'm trying to find ways to be like, this is a reading time. This is a time for reflection. This is a time to kind of think about nature and go out in like the crackling wetness. I'm trying, in other words, to recognize the June gloom and the May gray as a really special time of year, honestly, and one that I have strangely a nostalgia for. So I wonder what you guys think of gray weather. Is it always depressing? Does it have to be? Because it seems like that's the default. I'm fighting against it. But I also think there's beauty and magic in the gray as well. That's my positive note. I hope that worked for you. Guys, I think that's it for today. Thanks so much for all the ideas that you're sharing with me and with the Nostalgia Trap community. We'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.